Hey, brassfacts here, back at it with another one of these. I originally made the first video, Sustainable Prepping, but in my ADHD-infused discussion, I created like 12 other topics that I wanted to talk about, so I split it into two, and I'm making this video now, part 2 if you will, that I'm going to call Honest Prepping or something. Concepts within the prepping community that I believe are important to come to grips with to have a successful, healthy, long-term kind of preparedness lifestyle, and for everything in between. To be sure, let me just discredit this entire video right at the get-go, because that's what we do here. I'm not really a poster child of preparedness, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I have, a year or so of food, 6 months of water, a giant box of medical, mud TP, some training, a little bit of toothpaste, and a bunch of other crap. But yeah, I have a long way to go. I need a house. Trust me, I'm working on it, but holy shit, this market. And a bunch of training I need to do, a bunch of skills I need to work on. But I think, I can provide some decent value because I've been doing this for just over a decade. And I might be able to help some of you that are lost in the primordial sauce of preparedness of kind of how to make sense of it all. As we get into these, remember, nothing is wrong with preparing for the sake of preparing. If you have your shit figured out, then, don't feel compelled to change things simply because some idiot on the internet told you to. You don't need a reason to prepare. You are a free-ish human in a free-ish country. Doing things on a whim is the whole point of this pathetic existence. So go nuts. But if you need some pointers to make sense of it all, here's part 2. Let's discuss honest preparedness. And we're going to tackle some of these assumptions, once again, with a limited, off-the-cuff script, footage that has nothing to do with the content being discussed, because I have a terabyte of footage that I need to get rid of. Alright, let's go. Senseless ramblings. First off, effective preparedness is a hobby and a lifestyle, not a job. It is important to understand for those getting into preparedness that for most people, all-encompassing preparedness is going to take up a huge amount of relative money, time, and effort. There are certainly many people that will tell you you should take all this extremely seriously, that preparedness should be like a job, taxes, bills, oil changes, something you do rain or shine. And to a degree, that is not a bad attitude to have. But it's important to understand, for starters, 8 out of 10 times, those people are YouTubers or something where it is literally their job to do this, or they're college students who don't have a job. Realistic preparedness is exhausting to keep up long term when approached from the perspective of a job, because you already have a job, and having 2 jobs sucks. Key to long-term successful preparedness is to make it fun, enjoyable, and satisfying. Going shooting once a month and replacing food and water preps is something everyone can do, but taking it beyond that, training hard to advance your handgun skills, 1-second draw times, learning how to can food, taking care of chickens, learning who Mr. P25 is, the list goes on. These things take a lot of effort, especially in aggregate, and you need to enjoy it, you need to be excited to do these things. So, the end goal is make it fun. Sometimes that means, you're going to disproportionately spend more money on certain things and less on other things. It means you're probably going to be LARPing a disproportionate amount of the time. Sometimes it means you need to make a dumbass gun project like a stupid PCC or a TP9 to keep things passionate and fun. Now, to be sure, do all that you can to stay practical, to stay focused, and to stay purpose-driven. Don't let fun be the primary driving factor of what you do, but absolutely do not let preparedness cease to be a entertaining, fun, satisfying hobby. Now, I can already see it. Brass facts, I love my job, and preparedness should be a job because it's a responsibility as a man. Yeah, I know, we're saying the same thing. If you are one of those people that has a job that is fun and they're excited to wake up day after day to do, then hell yeah, I guess you can apply that here, and then preparedness isn't a hobby, but, we're saying the same thing, right? Cool. Awesome. Moving on. Perhaps something to consider in regards to viewing this as a hobby instead of a job. Don't be ashamed of it. Some anecdotal statements. Most middle-aged adults are spending luxury cars worth of money on off-roading 4x4s, campers, and more. If this is your hobby, keep it reasonably, absolutely. But don't be ashamed of spending large sums of money if this is sustainable and within budget. After all, not only is preparedness practical, but it's fun. Don't be ashamed of taking stuff like this seriously, because after all, if you're going to be spending this much money, it's cool to take it to the extreme. I prepare for the most extreme Mad Max, shit hit the fan scenario, doing break contact and hood rat shit under nods with the boys. For many people, they're going to write this off as LARPing, and you know what? They're probably right. I probably won't ever need to use night vision in the United States in a violent scenario. but it ends up being a great way to slowly build up a high level of confidence, communication, and skills with my team. And now, if any much reduced disaster does come, well, you have a team with strong built up teamwork and preps well in excess of what is probably required. And in that case, sharing isn't even a burden and you can work together effectively. On the flip side, and I'll cover this in a bit, we actually have no idea what the hell is coming. So don't let others bully you into not doing what you want to do because it doesn't match their vision of what is practical or reasonable. Don't let them define the threshold of what you think should be taken seriously and what is the threshold of reaching LARP. No one knows what is coming. So many young preppers are worried about being viewed as cringe because they take their preps just a little bit too seriously compared to what is considered acceptable. Look, if you're buying guns, you're buying thermals, you're buying nods, you're buying all of these for preps, and then you don't take it seriously, I actually view that as probably more cringe than buying all this stuff and then not using it. So don't be afraid, get out there, use this stuff. Worst case scenario, you're turning money into sound and having a good time. Which I don't even know why we think is so bad to begin with. $469. Nice. 69. Nice.
Be less cringe.
Okay, let's pump the brakes a bit and flip the script. Preparedness is absolutely a lifestyle, it is a hobby, but don't let it cross over to the point where it becomes your entire life. Remember, you have friends, family, and more, and not all of them are going to be in prepping as much as you are or even at all. Bear Independent mentioned a poignant statement in the comment section of last video, and some people elaborated on that. Preparedness is a continued means to ensure stability and quality of life long term. Not to be a cliche, but for many people I've noticed the stress and fear of preparing of what might come ruins the here and now. And to me, that kind of defeats the point. Don't let unintentionally the preparedness for the end of times become your new status quo in life. The way to deal with this, I find, is compartmentalization and budgeting. Budgeting allows you to dedicate a certain amount of your income to keep prepping sustained, but it also acts as a safeguard to limit you from over-prepping to a certain degree and spending way too much money and time for this simpler task. Obviously, the amount you want to budget and can budget and time you want to dedicate is dependent on the person, but be sure it doesn't consume your entire life. Do other things. Me in my early 20s, I was so hyperfixated on preparedness that I gave up a lot of relationships, friends, and cool things I could have done. Now, ultimately, it did lead to a career path with YouTube, which is kind of cool, but that's not going to be the norm. Okay, moving on. I've been teasing this part for quite a bit, but being prepared for a full-blown disaster scenario is probably the least relevant component of preparedness. You also need to be prepared for the reality that the most likely shit-hit-the-fan scenario has nothing to do with guns. For starters, you could just lose your job, your home, and everything. If you get fucked up in a crash, medically, or I don't know, you have shit genetics and you pay medical bills, every single day past your 40s, all these things are going to ruin you far more likely than the US being plunged into the dark ages. Even if we do get a, shit hit the fan scenario, there is a very good chance it's going to look a lot like a South American economic collapse where violence suddenly goes to 8, inflation to 12, but everyone still ends up needing to go to work, and life kind of just goes on from there, forever. Which, man, does that start to sound like what we're kind of approaching now. There really isn't any safeguards with that you can prepare for by having extra guns, extra beans, extra medical. There is a certain component of preparedness that involves, security, food, water, and stuff like that. But there also is a large component of preparedness which involves realizing that your status in life and preparing is integrally linked. And consider that some of the most realistic disaster, economic ruination, collapse of Pax Americana, inflation, spiraling violence, generally gets solved by improving your status in life.
Oh, gamer. I fucked up.
You said.
Okay, next up. No one knows what's coming. Most influences can only give you quantifiables. Outside of environmental preparedness for regional weather cycles, like tornadoes, flooding, hurricanes, snow-induced power outages, whatever, we don't really know what's coming. At all. Ask any of the old-timers that have prepared, they'll tell you they've heard it all. So what does this mean for us, not knowing the when, how, and to what extent a scenario might unfold? Well, first off, I think it means hyperfixating on a specific scenario is kind of a bad game plan, especially if that scenario has a very low overlap with any other scenarios. Like, say, perhaps fighting zombies, so you only have 10,000 rounds of 22 LR because your only goal is to shoot zombies in the face. Yes, way more common than you think in 2014. The more modern version of that is those that refuse to invest in high-end electronics because they're not going to survive an EMP and they are convinced an EMP is the only thing that can happen. First off, your understanding of an EMP is probably a bit flawed. No, 1 second after is not an accurate depiction of what an EMP will do, but more importantly, min-maxing for a very specific scenario is going to decrease your odds of survival in other scenarios or your quality of life in other scenarios. This further applies when discussing longevity of events. Many discard the idea of certain preps because, once again, they're convinced the boog is going to last, 30 years, and anything that can't last that long is pointless. The flip side of this, there are those that refuse to prep more than 3 weeks worth of supplies because nothing will ever last that long. Or the popular one right now, and I can't imagine why it's popular right now, those that prep only to fight governmental style forces or invading forces, and thus have minimal supplies to act independently alone long term. The point here is all of these are very unlikely scenarios, so picking one of these unlikely scenarios is going to severely limit you. I could go on with examples here forever. The reality is I don't really have an answer for this or a solution. Not knowing means you're probably gonna have to pick something rough and work towards it. My key takeaway here is just don't get married to any one single final preparedness plan because it will hamstring you elsewhere. Keep it flexible, keep an open mind, and understand that almost everyone changes their mind on what they think is going to happen every couple of years. Just keep your preps flexible in duration, scale, and scenario, and make sure you have a scalable response. Not everything needs an AR-15 with nods, but also your concealed carry handgun is probably going to be mighty underkill in some other scenarios. Just prep for what is most likely, and then add on top of that, and add on top of that, and add on top of that, and soon you'll have a fairly complex, scalable response plan. A thing to note to kind of counteract that, every single one of these scenarios is pretty low in likelihood. With enough potential scenarios and enough time, the unlikely may start becoming the likely. I don't think at any point in history where the fan was hit by the shit, people were like, oh yeah, I totally expected that to happen. So don't allow the unknown to be an excuse not to prepare, just don't drink the Kool-Aid and keep your response varied. No one knows what's coming.
I'm so concussed!
Okay, that's about it. There's probably more to talk about, and hey, maybe we'll do a third video sometime down the line, but these were the leftover topics from part 1 that I kind of wanted to discuss in their own video, so perhaps this helps you, perhaps it doesn't, perhaps you're going to yell at me, who knows. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and here's some dog footage.
It's a dog.
AC brake in the car. I done.